Baby.
Welcome to the Awaken Woman episode, where we delve into the inspiring stories of individuals who have overcome adversity and transformed their lives. I'm very excited for today's episode. I'm with Rachael Hevrin, who is also a friend and is also a trauma informed yoga teacher. She's got a really interesting life story. So, yeah, hopefully, I'm here making justice and asking interesting questions to get all her wisdom. So Rachel is originally from Texas. So she discovered yoga as a teenager and has since been an avid practitioner for the last 15 years. Yeah, I know she looks
Yeah.
very young. She's still young.
Still young. Yeah. But
Still
when you
very
start at
young.
15, 15 years,
Exactly.
edging 30 makes sense now.
I thought you started at 10 actually.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll keep that the story.
Yeah. And Rachel has experience in teaching vinyasa and hatha yoga, embodied flow, meditation, and yoga nidra. And she recently certified trauma-informed teacher, so went through a training in Thailand, which I'm very excited to ask her a few questions because I know it was a very intense and full of knowledge experience. And she's also a registered yoga teacher. She will tell us more about this as well. Alongside her passion for holistic wellness, so this is the interesting part. Rachel has studied and worked as both an actor and a writer for the last decade. And I say interested part because of the difference of these two worlds.
Yeah.
I'm in the wellness world, and of course, I'm very interested in the topics that we are just gonna talk about. But when you mention I'm an actor and a writer, I'm like, oh wow, this kind of like gives a little bit of a different touch, which is great because it
Mm,
brings such a different perspective.
yeah.
So that's why I mentioned the interesting part, meaning like, changing a little bit the
It's a surprise, not
a
what you
surprise.
expect.
There you go. You
Yeah,
said it
yeah.
perfectly. Yeah.
Mm,
And so with Rachel, we want to chat today about what exactly is trauma in
mm.
practical terms. No, not really complicated terms. So something that everyone can understand in simple ways. We will delve into the autonomic nervous system. So the is dysregulated and regulated, or as we call it, the sympathetic and parasympathetic states, and what are the top down and bottom up practices for trauma healing. So, yeah, very excited to have you here, Rachel. Is there anything else that you would like to mention before we dive deeper into the topics?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super, super excited. This is actually my very first podcast. So,
Ah,
yeah, even more exciting. You really covered my whole life, man. So I think these are the two things that I've done all my life. It's been yoga and meditation. I got started, like you mentioned, when I was really, really young. And then acting and writing. So this has been what I've been juggling the last 29 years. So you've really covered it.
amazing. Well, she already told us her age. I told you she looks very young, but yes, 15
It's
years
all
of
that yoga.
experience. All that, yeah, that's it.
Mhm.
Being in the wellness world. I'm 36 years
Are
old, about
you?
to turn
No,
37.
you're not. Oh my God, you're saying I
Yes.
look young. Hello.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. We are
Wow.
young. We are all young.
We're just young.
We are just young. Yeah. Adult there's a term is young adults. I love that one.
Young adults.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I love it.
We'll claim it.
We'll claim it. Exactly. So this is Rachel and I. We are an evidence that when we embrace wellness, when we embrace mindfulness and all these practices that we are gonna be chatting about, this is you eat all of these years,
Yeah.
and
It's like
we
Benjamin Button effect.
Benjamin
Just go
Button
backwards.
effect. Exactly. So I want to start with that surprise part about your journey.
Hmm.
I know we had kind of like some idea of what we were gonna cover, but I really want to know when we go like into that, history and timeline of
Hmm.
how your life took such an interesting turn and different perspective in the industry of yoga, wellness, well-being.
Mm.
So what was the because I'm sure there was something there that triggered that change from acting and being a writer, because you also have certifications, into completely turning around your career?
It was kind of the opposite because whenever I was a teenager, when I was 15, that's when I started getting into yoga. So I remember so I'm from a really small Texas town, and the first yoga studio that I had ever seen had opened up next to my house. And I just remember feeling this draw towards it. I had never practiced yoga before. Like, this was definitely not a part of my culture. I hadn't seen anyone practicing or heard about yoga. I just had this sense like, okay, there's something about this that's for me. Oh, hello, kitty cat.
Yes, sorry.
That's all good. Yeah, and so I remember I just called and I left a voicemail, and I left this really chirpy voicemail. I was like, "Hi, I'm Rachel and I want to be a yoga teacher. Call me back. Bye." So like she called me back, the owner, and she talked to me and got me to come in, and her name was Jessica Depew, and that was the first mentor that I had, and she really took me under her wing, and I became really involved in the studio. It was the first place that I ever taught. She took me to her first yoga teacher training, which was in Houston with Yoga Rasa School of Yoga. That was with Tracy Brace Hatton. So I completed my first 200 hour, which is like the first level of a yoga teacher training when I studied for maybe 2, 3 years, and I got certified at like 18. But
Wow. So
yeah,
it
so
went, yeah, yeah,
but
go.
yeah, well, I got certified at 18, and then I went to uni, and I wanted to be a writer as well. My first degree, or not degree, but first major that I was going for was in journalism.
Mm,
And then, yeah, acting had always been like a hobby for me since I was a kid as well. Just, you play when you're a kid, you don't really know what you're doing, and you just put on, well, this is what I did. I put on shows, and I like would watch my favorite episodes of a TV show, and I would like put them on a script, and I would beg my brother and sister to act it out with me. My
yeah.
favorite show at the time was I Love Lucy. It's like an old 1950s sitcom. I would watch it at my grandma's, and I
Wow.
had to be Lucy, and Grant and Emma could be whoever else they wanted, but I made them come and like pretend with me. This is how I played. So it always been like a hobby. And then I went to uni and I met a guy who I ended up dating, who invited me to be part of his short film. And then it just took off from there. So yoga has always been my practice. It's always been a huge part of my life.
Right.
And acting came in when I was about 18, 19, and that's when I
Wow.
started doing like short films and indie films. And I dropped out. I dropped out of university. Actually, I was gonna like move to LA and study with a coach who I was really into at the time, named Ivana Chubbuck. And then I ended up traveling and moved to Greece instead. And so,
Yes.
yeah,
There's another
like, but
interesting story in Greece.
yeah, all these different twists and turns. That's life, though, You think you have
That's
it figured out,
life.
and it just, you never know where
That's
you're gonna end
it.
up.
It takes us to places and paths that we never really thought. I'm sorry about my cat. He's
No, I
very
love it.
needy
I
today.
really want a cat myself, so
Yeah, we were chatting with
I know.
Rachel that she wants a cat with her partner. I'm sure
Bring a cat in.
I can convince him.
Please do.
Uh
Mike, we need a cat. Side
yes,
note.
Mike, if you're listening to us.
We need one.
Going back to topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's when we connect the dots and we are like, wow, like this person took me through this like whole different path, or this small decision took me through like
Mm,
this knowledge or this different
yeah.
view of life, or changing completely my career. So we can touch a little bit also here on intuition, on allowing ourselves to also flow with life. So it's good to have an idea of what we want to do, like, and where we want to head. But
Hmm.
Rachel is sharing her story, and if she didn't really trust that notch and your intuition, you probably wouldn't be even be here doing what you're doing. So
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. You
yeah,
can't really plan for it. Like you can do, I'm really all about like knowing what you want and going for what you want, but you almost have to have this flexible space to allow for the unknown. And that's a space that I really struggle to trust. So this is still my practice, is struggling with the
yeah,
unknown. And it will happen to you whether you're prepared for it or not. The unknown is going to happen regardless. So you might
yeah.
as well, or I might as well, just accept it and know that it's going to happen, and I can't
Yeah.
over plan for everything because I am quite a planner. It's how I find my safety.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
love this. Thank you for sharing that. I think that that was a powerful part.
Yeah.
And I love the way that you put it, like just having that view, but allowing for flexibility. It's
Mm,
like it even sounded like nice, like, oh, I'm willing to be more, release more
yeah,
control.
yeah.
And yeah, I think this is
It's
sometimes where the magic happens, right?
100%. And it's also like it's part of the nuance of life. Like instead of going all or nothing and leaving no room for anything else, or going the opposite extreme and being like, anything goes, I'll just float wherever the wind takes me. It's like allowing the room for the happy medium. And I think that's where I struggle. And I think where a lot of people struggle is knowing that you can have both and you can hold both polarities, because that's really what life is. It's that gray area. It's that middle
Yeah.
ground. It's having the room for to sway between two ends of the spectrum as opposed to just 0 to 100. But naturally, I'm a very 0 to 100 person. So this ebb and flow and not just going from one extreme to the next is my practice. It's something I struggle
Yeah,
with. So,
I love that. And what I will share as well, that I completely resonate with that part, and it's also been something on my journey learning to release control.
mm,
Um, which you and I know this part of the nervous system. Now we are getting a little bit more into the nervous system. So
yeah,
I even realized in my own journey, and also with a lot of my clients, that when we are in a constant fight or flight state, coming from unpredictable environments, having to always
yeah,
be aware, hyper vigilant of our environments, because we either had a reactive parent or we had instability, and that sometimes can even just be emotional, let
hmm,
alone if it's emotional, physical, financial. Like, if so, it can even happen in small things
yeah,
that
100%.
we didn't have that stability, and then that created that being in a hyper state, and then being in that hyper state is what is causing us to trying to control, because if I
Hmm,
control the aspects of my life, then I don't feel that discomfort that I
mm,
felt when I was a kid, when there was uncertainty.
mm,
So we don't deal very well from the past, coming from the past, with uncertainty, because uncertainty could mean pain. And
yeah,
even our primal brain is also gonna always keep us safe. So our
yeah.
main
Safe, not happy.
safe,
That's
not
the thing.
happy.
We're not wired to be happy. We're wired
Yes,
to be safe. And this
exactly.
primal part of the brain that you're talking about, I think the best way that it was described to me of what trauma is first understanding just like the basic structure of the brain. So the primal part of the brain, I almost like to call it the lower half of the brain. It's the thing that develops
Mm,
first. So you have your brain stem, you have your limbic system, which is like the emotional brain, and then you have your higher brain, which is the upper part of the brain that develops last. That's your
yeah.
prefrontal cortex. So when we're talking about sensing threat in our environment, having to be hyper vigilant for this threat, when a threat comes in, it comes in through the senses. So this is processed through the brainstem first.
Mhm.
This then alerts our amygdala, which is part of the emotional brain that deciphers if something's a threat or safety.
Yes.
And then immediately we're in what is known as, like you've mentioned, fight, flight, freeze, there's fawn, there's
Fun.
collapse.
Yeah.
There's these different responses that the body does involuntarily first. So this is the autonomic nervous system where all these responses come from. This is the same part of the nervous system that controls your heart rate, controls your digestion, things that you're
Yes.
not thinking about consciously. So
Exactly.
when someone has experienced, like for me, when trauma happens,
Hmm.
your body is automatically responding in one of these defense mechanisms, fight, flight, freeze, whatever, and it gets stuck there because it has not been able to regulate back into homeostasis, back into a safe place where things are okay, where you are safe, where you are loved, or whatever else. Um, so I think it's important to know that these responses are involuntary. It's not because you're not strong enough or smart enough to keep that response
Exactly.
from happening. It's
Yeah.
something your body already does. And by the time you're responding from that bodily place, the upper part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is the last thing to respond.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of goes offline because when we're in a survival mode, everything else that's not necessary to survive, it doesn't
It
matter. It goes
doesn't
offline.
matter.
No,
Exactly.
it
Exactly.
goes offline.
Yeah.
So that means that it doesn't matter how much you know, how much you research into mental health and you do all these things. It's important stuff, but if it's all in the emotional awareness part of the brain where you can create
Mm.
language to conceptualize pain and you can have a more of a analyzed logical sort of perspective on things, that
Yes.
part is not going to help you when the bottom part is triggered into that
Exactly.
chronically dysregulated state.
Exactly. And we
Yeah.
will go in a second uh, a little bit deeper into bottom up and bottom down, top down, top up, and bottom down. You will explain and
All the
explain
different
it,
ones.
all different ones.
There's just two, it just gets
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah, yeah. You will explain it. But what I wanted to mention though on that part, which is very, very interesting on how the brain perceives a threat, is that
Mm,
it's not that the responses of the nervous system there's something wrong, like as you said, there's nothing wrong if your first reaction is dissociation or hypervigilance or avoidance. What happens is when we don't come back to
mm-hmm,
regulating that part of the system, the nervous system that was highly triggered, and
mm-hmm.
then coming back to homeostasis and really closing the cycle of
Yeah.
that episode, that's when trauma happens, and that's when
Mm-hmm.
the disconnection. So trauma is basically equals
Yeah.
disconnection with the body, disconnection with the emotions, because we lived a situation that was so highly emotional that usually this happens in childhood when we don't have the emotional tools and even the
Mm,
mental understanding to really perceive situations how they are. So we tend to internalize, we tend
100%.
to, yeah, see it as an extreme. So then
Mm.
our body will do anything possible to not let us go back to that pain.
Yeah, because no matter what, like I mentioned earlier, we're not wired to be happy, we're wired to be safe. So no matter what, if we feel that we have some sort of threat, whether that's perceived or an actual threat, and a lot of
Yeah.
things that happen when we're children, like we can look back at it now and be like, oh, well, that wasn't a big deal. But to our little minds and bodies, it was a huge deal. So that's another
Exactly.
thing is trauma. We really understand it from the media and just from, general knowledge of being something that's really extreme. And that's obviously the case. These are the obvious cases of trauma when it's abuse, when it's a death in the family, when it's a horrific accident. But there's also a spectrum that I think doesn't get talked about a lot. And
Yes.
this spectrum is complex because we live very complex lives. So we have something known as CPTSD, which
Mhm.
is complex post stress trauma disorder.
Yes.
And that is when little things happen. So, say as a child, you didn't feel that you were seen or you were heard in the way that you wanted to be, but that doesn't, and this could happen just little bit by little bit, but consistently. It's like the death by a thousand cuts. This
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you had horrible parents.
Yes.
This just means that they were trying the best that they could to regulate their own probably dysregulated nervous systems and responding to life that was stressful and wasn't able to give you what you needed and what you were unable to actually voice that you needed because you were like what, 7, like you're a kid. So these little tiny cuts can also lead to to trauma. Complex, little traumas are actually, they affect us for the rest of our lives.
Yes, 100%. And it's possible to heal, and we are gonna touch on that. But I think, yeah, I love that explanation, and it's also being proven by scientific studies that emotional pain is
Mm,
as painful as physical pain.
mm, yeah.
And as you said, like our minds like just take this like situation that happen and just make it like really big for us when we are kids, and we are not able, we don't have the emotional tools. So It's
Mm,
also understanding how a situation can impact our life and starting to give that validation, that reassurance, that compassion, that feeling seen, that support, whatever we wanted to receive in our childhood in specific situations that we didn't get consistently. That's
mm,
what as adults we need to give to ourselves. So
mm.
in terms of the practices, so bottom up and top down
Yeah.
practices, would you be able to explain us a little bit more what are these and what, from your perspective and own experience, are
Yeah.
the ones that facilitated or your healing?
Yeah, I think when it comes to top down and bottom up practices, I touched on it very briefly earlier, where I said it doesn't matter how much you read or learn about mental health or all of the stuff that you use your intellect and your emotional awareness and your ability to put experiences to language. When you do all of this work, and can be so frustrating. It was so frustrating for me, and I can explain my experience in a bit, but you do all this work. And then this uses, by the way, the top part of the brain. This is the prefrontal cortex. When I say top front of the brain, that's what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
And then you come into the situation that there's a subconscious memory of a past experience that reminds you of this current situation. And what
Hmm.
trauma is, it doesn't respond to the context of the current situation, it responds to the past.
Yes.
So it's constantly going back to whether that's something you are aware of or not aware of. You could not have a memory of it, or you could have a very clear memory of it. But your body's going to take that sense of threat, and when the threat is triggered, that's, your fight, your flight, your freeze, your fawn, your collapse. When that is triggered, it doesn't matter how much learning you do, because that's not going to be active when you're in a state of survival. Because when you're
Yes.
trying to survive this threat, it doesn't matter how big or how small it seems to other people, because trauma isn't the story of what happened to you. It's what happens in your brain as a result of the story of what happens to you. Is what Gabriel
Mhm.
Mate says. That made a lot of sense to me. So when you're in that state of threat, you're just going to react. You're just going to try and get out of that as quick as possible in whatever way and whatever means is possible. So I think a lot of shame happens for people when they're like, God, like I'm trying so hard to change, and I want to be different, but it just feels like every time I come into the situation, it's like an autopilot mode, because it is an
Mm,
autopilot mode. It's a reaction of the autonomic nervous system, which is automatic, which is
exactly.
involuntary. It happens even before that little whisper of a threat comes up to your prefrontal cortex. This is what it's a knee-jerk reaction. So it can be super disempowering and super frustrating. And I know for my thing was what I really struggled with as a younger, you know, as a teenager, as a kid, is I really struggled in conflict. I really struggled with being a chronic people pleaser, because this was my way to find my sense of control, of managing my environment, of ensuring that if I can keep you happy, then I will be safe. And if
Mm,
I can in some way meet all your needs with, with just completely disassociating with my own, that you would maybe meet my need in some sort of breadcrumb way.
yeah.
And I got really like that. I didn't know how else to be,
Mhm.
because I was so disassociated from my own needs and my own boundaries and my own desires, because somewhere along the way I was learned or shown or that need, that speaking my truth and speaking my needs was not going to allow me the connections that I wanted. I
Yeah.
couldn't have those two things coexist. That's
Yeah.
what we're going to talk about as well, with attachment as well as authenticity. That's the
Yeah.
two basic human needs that Gabor Mate talks about as well. But not to get too off track here. So I've been involved with self-help and yoga obviously for all my life. So I knew all this stuff. Like I knew all this stuff,
Mhm.
but I couldn't manage to shift the way that I was, the dynamic that I had in my relationships. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I heard about this retreat, and I heard about it on a podcast. It's called Path of Love. And I always tell people, if I had all the money in the world, I would send everybody to this retreat. Honestly,
Wow.
I had no idea what I was signing up for. Absolutely zero idea. And I remember they had like a questionnaire, and it's like a somatic therapy retreat, you know, 10 years of therapy in 7 days. And I was like, yeah, cool. Like 0 to 100, like fix me, like I'm ready to go, like,
I
and
need that.
I need it. So I was filling out the little questionnaire, and it said, tell us about things that you might have perceived as being traumatic. And I was like, oh, I don't have a horrific childhood. My parents loved, I mean, no one is perfect. Like no parents are perfect. I think that's
Yeah.
obvious to everyone, but I always felt very loved. Like I always felt, like my dad was always really proud of me, and my mom was always really attentive. Like I was like, I don't really know of anything super crazy that I could put on here.
Mm.
But then I realized, probably a few years later after I did the retreat, when I had some sort of conceptual knowledge to understand the whole experience that I went through somatically in the retreat, was
Mm-hmm.
when I went, they had one day, it was called the anger day.
Oh.
And this is, when I say somatic therapy, probably should touch a little bit on what that means. It's the types of therapy that they use breath and they use movement to directly get in contact with the body without having to, go through a talk or cognitive behavioral therapy
Yeah.
where we discuss and we talk about like the memories of things. It goes straight to the body.
Activating
And
the sympathetic state.
sorry.
Activating the sympathetic state.
Um, Sometimes yes, but it's called bottom up therapy, where you're brought into a safe space where
Mhm.
you're able to explore these triggers that usually would send us into a state of overwhelm. But the
Mhm.
key thing is you give yourself a visceral experience that completely contradicts the helplessness, the rage, the collapse that you've always felt in this particular situation. So the visceral experience that I had that contradicted the collapse that I would get whenever I would even just want to express my needs, or what I felt, or even being asked like, what do you want, was so almost threatening, because it made me have to touch into the pain of the needs that had that weren't getting met, because I was trying to construct this little bubble of like, I don't have needs, so I have the full capacity to meet all of yours, to keep
Mm.
my attachments, because that's what I
Yeah.
thought. I couldn't have authenticity and my attachments at the
Yes.
same time.
Yes.
So this day, I was able to, they use something a lot called Gestalt therapy, which is
Yes.
reenactment.
Yeah.
And you don't like go through a whole thing of this is what happened, and this is what happened when I got in this argument with my dad, and this is blah, blah, blah. You have a reenactment. And this person is talking to you as if they were, the person that you had that issue with. And you're able to say everything that you needed to say, but you couldn't say. And you're
Mm.
able to experience the sense of rewriting the ending to
Yeah.
a really painful situation. And so I was able to, things were coming up that I completely forgot about. And things were coming out of me. And this anger, like it was the most intense thing that I had ever felt in my life. I was 24 at the time when I did this. And it was like all of these years of just pent up anger and rage and just power as well. I felt really disempowered, you know, a little bit younger. I felt really like I didn't have that power to like have, my space in the room and say, this is what I need, this is what I want. All of that disempowerment just completely dissipated because I was in a safe space. They really, really kept this feeling of safety, because it's only within this, it's called, a window of tolerance. It's only within this window of tolerance of safety that we can then explore these really painful experiences and triggers and emotions, and we feel them to heal them, right? So we
Yeah.
feel them to then realize it's not going to kill us, so then we can come out the other side and say, okay, this is not a threat anymore.
Mhm.
And when we realize, we come back to those same situations later on, because the body has like a muscle memory. Now, instead of the initial threat, it remembers that experience that you had of coming into a similar situation and coming out the other side not completely dysregulated, coming out the other side and feeling strong and empowered and calm, and you had a different experience to connect to. And
Yeah.
that's what really, really, more than anything else that I've ever done, that is what changed my whole life. This was a bottom up therapy, which I know we'll talk about a little bit more. It's a bottom up therapy retreat. Somatic therapy is bottom up.
Yeah.
Um, the other part of it that I think doesn't get often talked about as much kind of in the newer wellness world, because everybody loves the idea of, somatic therapy and embodiment and all of this, and it's fantastic and we absolutely need it. But I also feel that we need what's known as top down as well. And, Bessel van der Kolk talks about this in his book, that we need a combination of both, and body keeps the score. It's not just
Yeah.
one. The reason why we need top down, so like we mentioned earlier, the prefrontal cortex, that's what makes meaning of things. So
Mm-hmm.
all of the threats that are coming up and everything that is felt in a very physical way, to conceptualize it, to make meaning of it, to put language to it, we need the prefrontal cortex, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so when I came out of the retreat, I remember having all these feelings of being like solid and empowered, and I felt more comfortable in conflict, but I couldn't quite put to words what it was that shifted. And I was
Yes.
trying to find a way that I could, okay, like move forward, and because we want to make meaning like human beings, that's what we do to find our purpose. That's
That's
why
it.
we want to
Meaning.
have meaning.
Mm.
um and so I ended up working with a coach who was a people pleasing recovery coach, a codependency recovery coach. Her name's Haley McGee. And she was probably for the first time someone who was able to give me super tangible tools that didn't seem like the vague, sort of, you just have to stand up for yourself and you just have to say
Yeah.
no. And I'm like, yeah, okay, it's that
Put
easy. Sure.
boundaries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Set
all right.
boundaries. Yeah.
Well, like it's just you hear that stuff a lot and it went in one ear and out the other, but she gave like such tangible things that were able to be done like the day of listening to that coaching session. I was able to do that same day. It was that like easy to tackle and do. And it is what helped me take all of these new feelings that I was experiencing that I couldn't quite know how to make tangible and put into words. And that's what I think gave me the whole sense of healing. Is I healed from the bottom up. I was able to not feel these huge senses of trigger with familiar situations that made me react from the past, but I was also able to put meaning and put words to it. And so it was the whole, we need the whole spectrum of that. And it was when I started working with her, I left my relationship that I was in for 7 years, that I thought leaving was the most impossible thing in the world. It
Mm-hmm.
felt so impossible, but having been through such a journey with learning how it was to actually have needs,
Yeah.
and to actually be a human being with
Mm-hmm.
desires,
Yeah, and
and
something that came up for
resensitize.
me there is like when you confront the impossible, that's when you are empowered.
Yeah, I felt empowered enough to be able to leave.
Yeah. And even the empowerment that comes after taking that decision that you thought you were completely unable to make, or it felt that it was impossible to do, but once you do it, you realize how
Hmm.
empowered you are as a human being.
Yeah. It gives you the visceral experience that completely contradicts the helplessness that you used to feel. And even that, like even the fact that I was able to leave
Hmm.
and I didn't die. In fact, I completely thrived by
Yes.
by by choosing like for myself the life that I wanted to leave and the person that I wanted to be and the way that I wanted to live moving forward. Taking
Yeah.
that step and taking that choice was one of the best things that I ever did for myself, because it was that next
Wow.
year that I was like, man, like this is probably the best year of my life. And just being able to
Wow.
also like have a whole new community of people that came into my life that absolutely touched my life in such a deep way.
Yeah.
And another thing is taking the old identity of who you thought you used to be, and then you're replacing it with this new identity, which is coming from the response of the community of people that you surround yourself with. And it's
Mhm.
so funny because like I talk about my old life with my friends now, and they're like, Rach, like you're the most assertive person I know. Like you're the most like direct, like you inspire me to
Mm.
communicate with my truth in a way that
That's
no
how
one
I
ever
see you as
has.
well.
And I was like, you have no idea like how hard I've worked. And to hear you say that, it's almost like
Wow.
unbelievable to me to hear these words come from people that are in my life currently. It's
Yeah.
like you are so like I can't believe that you used to be like this. And I was like, I can't either. Like it's just
Your
such a
story is
night and day
so fucking
change.
inspirational.
Thank you.
Like
Yeah, well, it's
Rachel, this is amazing. All that you have shared. Like I want you to also listen the whole podcast again, and you will see like it's amazing with how much wisdom you speak and all the
oh,
knowledge that
thank
you
you.
have and your growth. Like the woman that I see here, it doesn't matter how you were before. It was part of your journey, right? Like, and it's the same
Mm,
as me. Like
yeah, yeah,
who we
yeah,
were before is still part of us. Is that
absolutely.
hurt inner child? Is that a little girl who learned that in order to receive love and belonging, she
Hmm.
had to people please, she had to self-abandon her needs.
Yeah.
And it's very common, right? Like in and I'm so glad that you are sharing your own story because it just gives inspiration for people to see that, as you mentioned, trauma doesn't necessarily, it is also, but it doesn't necessarily has to be a massive event. It can
Yeah.
also happen in the small things that are
A
still
hundred
affecting.
percent. And I think it's really
Yeah.
key to understand this because what makes trauma, especially trauma's difficult, period. I mean, it's one of the most horrible things to go through.
Yeah.
But a new level of difficulty with trauma is, or another facet of difficulty rather, is when someone doesn't have a very clear thing to point their finger at, that this is where it all went downhill. This is why I am the way that
Yes.
I am. My dad was an alcoholic and he beat me 3 times a day, or I had this massive accident that I was paralyzed from, or I was just all these big things, these big, big things that you can point your finger at is what almost makes it clear like this makes sense, this is what it has meaning,
The
right?
meaning,
Clear
exactly.
meaning.
Yeah.
Whenever someone doesn't have a clear thing to point their
Yeah.
finger at, the finger turns around to themselves because they don't have a clear reason as to why they are the way that they are. So something's inherently wrong with them.
Yes.
This is where shame comes in. Like a huge
Yes.
thing with trauma is the shame. And that's, I relate with that because I was like, why am I the way that I am?
Hmm.
If I didn't have these horrific stories to point the finger at as this was the reason, why am I the way that I am? Why do I struggle with the things that I struggle with? and and I felt like the hardest thing, and it still makes me like cringe thinking about it, is feeling like I was weak or
Mm.
feeling like I was stupid. Like I didn't trust my intellect, I didn't trust my intuition. I was so disassociated from it. Like I
Mm.
mentioned, asking me like, what do you want? What are your needs? Was the most threatening thing because I had no idea. It was so scary to even think about that. I
Mhm.
was so disconnected from that. So feeling weak and feeling stupid were really, and I think there's still like painful beliefs that I think in some ways I'm still running from and trying to prove
Yeah.
myself not being weak and not being stupid.
Yeah.
So the blame was put on myself. Something was inherently wrong with my personality or who I was, which is clearly not true.
Hmm.
I know like a lot of people are going to listen to this and be like, but you're not at all, and how could you think that? And we buy into these crazy narratives to because we're desperate for meaning. We're desperate to clarify. We don't like uncertainty, like you said earlier. We need to know why. But when we realize that all of this stuff has happened over like little small traumas, not getting our needs met in some capacity, not feeling seen, not feeling heard. And so subconsciously we're reacting from that memory. And it doesn't matter how, much you grow into this amazing adult and have, made all these accomplishments, and you still are reacting from that subconscious memory when you're
Yeah.
feeling triggered, whether it's in relationships or whether it's in your work or whether it's in whatever else.
Yeah. We are still
That's
carrying that hurt inner child within, and
yeah, we
as
live in
you,
the past.
we
Trauma
live
is
in
you
the
living in the
past.
past. It's
Exactly. And
it's
as
like a
you
time
mentioned, is like,
capsule.
yeah, and it's like, it's until we integrate it into who we really are, and going back, as you mentioned, going back. And what does it mean integrating? Is going back to those experiences and validating and acknowledging that even though you live those experiences, they are valid, they are like impactful for you. Because sometimes what happens, even when I do all this work with my clients, is, but that was not that big. Why I created all these wound and these
Yeah.
beliefs? As like, because it was big for you when you were a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
you cannot heal what you don't validate. If you keep
Mm.
suppressing, if you keep repressing, if you keep avoiding, and invalidating your experiences, you are just reinforcing the wound that something is wrong with you, with
Yeah.
me, I'm not enough, I'm not
You're like
worthy.
at war with yourself. And that's the thing that I learn, from my best friend who's a therapist, and it's the best perk in the world, having your best friend be a therapist. She's taught me a lot about something called internal family systems.
Yeah. And you have
So
also so much wisdom, so give yourself some credit.
thank you. Yeah, she's really been a big support in this journey. Her name's Hilda, and I remember talking to her about a lot of the things that I was struggling with, and the relationship that I had to these different parts and these different voices and these different eh, things that I would struggle with on a day-to-day basis. And what was interesting is I initially used to think that we were all just one unit, like we
Hmm.
were just one unit of consciousness, like, and that was it. You were you, I was me. It was just, there wasn't anything more complex than that.
Hmm.
But what I learned in internal family systems is that we have different parts. And these
Hmm.
different parts are named different things. So you have a protect, or I have a protector, a criticizer, an inner child, all these different parts that have a reason, a very good reason for being there. Even if the method that they're using to try and keep you safe is detrimental and keeping you small, if it's using like an outdated system that was initially used for a good purpose, like maybe you
Yes,
at one point to be safe, you did need to shrink a little bit, and you
exactly.
did need to keep yourself, in hiding. Like maybe that was necessary at one point in time, or maybe it was necessary for you to get really defensive and fight
Exactly.
back and, or run. Like there was a really good point in time where you had this response from this little part of you that was designed to keep you safe. But the thing is, it needs to not only fight and defend, but also come back to a sense of safety and homeostasis. That's like the,
Mm.
the loop that we were talking about. But we
Exactly.
get stuck, or I got
Hmm.
stuck in these defenses.
Yeah.
Um, but the whole point is to keep you safe. So all of these things that we do and all these voices that we have, even the voice that is super critical and it's like, oh, you'll never be able to do this. Like you really should just like not go on that podcast. You really should just like not
Oh,
take
wow.
that job
I'm so glad you
offer.
came. Oh my
I'm so
God.
glad I came too. But yeah, they're
So much
there.
wisdom.
A
Yeah.
100% they're there.
Mm.
And I have to realize that this voice is actually not trying to self-sabotage me. I think self-sabotage is a big, it makes sense, but it's actually not the real story. The
I
real
love that.
story is that they want to keep you safe and they're using outdated methods, these little parts, and it's helpful to name them, right? And helpful to be like, why are you here? What are you trying to do? And realize I just want to keep her safe. That's what my criticizer is. I just want to keep her safe. Or I
Yeah.
have a pusher, like I'm like, I told you, 0 to 100, like pusher, pusher, pusher. Like I'm
Yeah.
constantly like, all right, like this year, I've done 4 teacher trainings. And it's great because I've learned a lot. And it's great because I've expanded a lot. But it also
Yeah.
comes from this pusher is like, she has to be seen. She has to be
Yeah.
amazing. So she has to do
Yes.
everything, be the best in the room. And
Mm,
as long as I'm kept being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, it's coming from, a need to be seen. And a need to be seen is to be safe. Because if we're not seen, then, we can't be safe. We can't be loved. This is our
yeah.
fundamental need for attachment,
Yeah.
with other people. And so, internal family systems is a method that helps us see and conceptualize all of our complexity, and also to realize that we're never doing anything to actually hurt ourselves, even if the method of which we are trying to escape pain or keep ourselves safe is really harmful.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's trying to keep you safe.
Yeah, it's what we mentioned
Mhm.
that our brain is wired for survival. So it's
Yeah,
learning little by little, increasing that window of tolerance that Rachel mentioned, is challenging yourself in a small doses every single day on doing the things that are uncomfortable, on sitting with that rejection, on sitting with that pain, on having that uncomfortable conversation, on setting boundaries, on speaking up. You're taking your own story of starting to look after your needs, even if that meant disappointing someone that expected you to be there for them first. So
yeah,
is learning that your safety, your happiness, and the relationship with yourself is more important than creating discomfort for others, and it is
mm,
allowing
mm,
yourself to go through that discomfort that will create that relationship with yourself.
yeah,
So I love the part that and I know we are almost on time, but I would love you to touch on, because I love that topic, and I think maybe a lot of people will resonate on attachment versus connection, or independence and
yeah,
connection.
yeah.
How do you see it, and how can we get into that fine line where we can have that connection but also have that interdependence? Probably we can see it.
Yeah. Well, this theory or perspective, whatever you want to call it, is from Gabor Mate, and it's the two basic fundamental needs as human beings. So we have our need for attachment, and this is our attachment to obviously primarily our caregivers. And as mammals, particularly as mammals, we need this to survive more so than any other species, humans. Because if we, as a baby, if we don't have our caregivers there present to our needs, taking care of us, feeding us, making sure that we're sleeping, blah blah blah, we die. So
Exactly.
it's like it's a survival need. We
Mhm.
need to attach to survive. And we need this longer than any other species because we stay in close contact with caregivers for a longer period of time than any other species. So,
Yeah.
this need to attach to people is actually a very basic fundamental need to survive.
Mhm.
So, that's that. The other need that he talks about is the need for authenticity. And he describes authenticity as like an attachment to yourself, but brings it down to the most fundamental level of authenticity is being in touch with your felt sense of, okay, this isn't safe. Maybe I shouldn't go down that dark scary path, or this is hurt, maybe I shouldn't touch that hot stove, or I'm exhausted, I need to sleep, I'm hungry, I need to eat. It's understanding our body's internal cues. And it goes a little bit more complex with, this relationship is hurting me. Maybe I should not be in this relationship. There's relationships are super complicated, but that's just an example.
Yes.
Um, there's there's a need to understand our body's internal cues and to understand what our desires are and be able to express that truth with those that we're attached to, whether it's our parents, our family, our community, our partner, whatever else, because that ability to express the truth is being able to survive on that level of taking care of yourself. Because
Hmm.
if you leave a person out in the wild alone and they are not in touch with their instinct, they don't survive either.
Yeah.
It's being in touch with your instinct on a very fundamental level.
Mhm.
um, that the problem happens when people realize, like myself, that these two needs can't coexist. So if I state my needs, if I have, feelings, if I have thoughts, if I have a way of expression of who I am that I am not accepted for, I have to sacrifice my truth and my authenticity
Mm.
to be part of the community that I desperately need, that we actually need each other so
Yes.
much to survive. It comes from a very primal place.
Yeah.
This idea of hyper independence, it's actually coming
A trauma
from,
response.
it's a trauma response, because no, this is the other end of the spectrum than
Exactly.
I was in. If
Me
nobody's
too.
like
Yes.
listening,
Yes.
then fuck you. Like I'll just go off and I'll live,
I do everything
by
on my own.
myself. I'll do everything alone,
Who were
so
we trying to trick with that thought, right? Like, am I gonna
I
be
know.
everything by myself?
But
Oh
people
yeah,
do
go
it.
and
Like
try it.
people
Yeah,
can do it and get super hyper independent. But are they fulfilled, and do they feel like
exactly.
a sense of just wellness in their life, and feeling connected? If we're not connected, isolation is a horrible, horrible experience for anyone. We deteriorate. We
Yeah,
don't thrive in isolation.
and we negate ourselves this beautiful gift of connection, which my own perspective is that what's really bringing fulfillment in life.
Mm,
And I resonate with this so much because even my own journey, I also went through like the hyper independence as a trauma response because as not being not having that emotional support on a consistent basis that
mm,
creates hyper independence. I cannot rely on others. I cannot trust others to be there for me.
yeah.
However, what I learned is that I was putting on them a need that I can give to myself. And when I started giving that need to myself, I started trusting others that they were going to be there for me. And they started
Mm,
being there for me because it didn't come from a need. It came from, I would like you to support me here, but if you don't, I still have my back. I still have
mm,
myself.
yeah.
And it was so beautiful. So, another question I have for you, because it just came to my mind when you were explaining that part, the part of authenticity. So let's say that someone is starting to work on this part where they are starting to set boundaries, they are starting to stand up for themselves, even taking on your own story. What happens when they start being more authentic and bringing that power? To themselves, and their people around them are not responding in a good way, and that
Mm,
starts to trigger them. So how
mm.
can they work on not going back to old patterns of I'm losing the love and acceptance and belonging, but rather, okay, this has nothing to do with me. I can stay on this track. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And I think that's a real challenge. And that's something I realized when I was really stepping into my own shoes and I was really owning who I was, is the people that you surround yourself with will influence you more than anything else.
Yeah.
So if one is stepping into their own shoes and taking on this authenticity, and they're realizing the relationships around them are not, they're not in alignment with that, it's it's probably time to really question the relationship.
Mhm. I
And
agree. I agree.
I'm really not like for like the super black and white, like just cut off anybody that
Mhm.
isn't like 100%. Like relationships are very complex,
There's a
but
gray area.
it's a gray area. But again, if it's something that's consistently causing you to go back to these old patterns, and not be able to move forward, and to be able to step into the fullness of what you're trying to grow into, our environment affects us so much. Like we really adapt to our environment. So just questioning your environment, and your environment more than anything else is the people that you surround yourself with. So it's a really hard question to just answer on like a very general level,
It's
because
beautiful answer.
but I think, yeah, your environment
Yeah.
does make a huge difference in your
Yeah.
life and your influence. So just,
Energetically too, because sometimes
yeah.
things and connections and relationships happen also on a deeper level, on an energetic level, that we don't sometimes don't even understand on a logical level why things are happening the way are happening. And just to add
Mhm.
onto that part that you say, maybe start observing if that relationship or friendship is serving you. I think that the most
Yeah.
important part is asking yourself, can I be my full self, and am I still
Mhm.
going to be accepted and loved regardless, even if that person is finding triggering, can they still at some point embrace me fully? um so yeah, that's
And
what
having
something, yeah.
boundaries, I think people
Mhm.
understand boundaries as keeping people out, but
Mhm.
boundaries can also be something that allows people to be in your life, but on a on a level, right? Like,
Yes.
you maybe you have someone in your life,
Yeah.
like say a parent or a sibling
Mhm.
that is a huge part of your life,
Yeah.
but there is that sense of boundary that needs to be put in place so you can still have that contact, but in a way that actually works for you, in a way that you can stay in your window of tolerance, like you say, not be completely like overwhelmed by this relationship,
Yeah.
let it take over your life, let it take over your nervous system, let it like
Yeah.
have control. You get to choose the boundaries that you set, to not just like block people away completely,
Yeah.
but you have boundaries to know how much you want them in your life and how much you don't, you
Yeah, and
know?
having that discernment, right?
Yeah.
Because
It's complex.
yeah, it's complex, and also relationships, they're gonna trigger us, but we cannot heal in environments where we constantly, is the word there,
Mhm.
constantly feel triggered. So if you're
Mhm.
constantly surrounded by people who are constantly triggering your past wounds, it's going to be hard for you to heal. There needs to be a certain level of triggering, yes, because that's life, that's how we heal, that's how we bring that wound to the conscious level. But there's also need to be discernment. Is that
Mhm.
person triggering me because they are no longer aligned with my new path, because they
Mhm.
are part of my old programming of living in
Mhm.
toxic relationships, living in conflict, having people that were not loving and accepting me fully? Or is that person still someone that I really value, that is bringing me something positive into my life, but they are
Yeah.
also sometimes triggering? Is an internal discernment that
Yeah.
you will be able to make as you get more in tune with your intuition. So
100%. And I think
yeah.
that's a real key point there. It's this discernment. It's a tuning. It's instead of having a black and white reaction to things, which I feel is a very trauma-based reaction. It's
Yeah.
the extreme opposite. It's no room for
Yeah.
having the upper part of the brain to come in and really look at the context and look at the situation, and gain some awareness around the many complexities and the gray areas, and then finding a way that supports you at your core and fundamentally like holds you in the direction that you're growing in and that you want to be moving towards, but doesn't shut off anything that like maybe even a little bit triggers you, because
Mm.
then it's
I run
it's just
away.
a trauma reaction. It's
Yes.
just, like they're toxic, they're out of my life, period. Like I don't care. Like I'm not going to talk to you ever
Yes.
again. We're constantly going to be doing that.
Yeah.
And I think healing really is apparent when we can hold life and all of its many colors and all of its many flavors, and people included, and be able to work boundaries that work for us, and doesn't shut everything else out,
Yeah.
and is be able to navigate in a very intuitive way.
Love that. Love that. So inspiring conversation. I've loved. I think we need maybe 5 more episodes, not even one more, because I
I'm
know I
super
can.
keen. I could talk to you for
Me
5
too.
hours.
Me too. And it's been honestly like so beautiful listening to you. I say this with
Oh,
my
thanks,
heart.
hon. Thank
Like
you.
I've enjoyed listening your story, like your wisdom, how much you have grown, how much you have
Thank you.
learned, and I'm sure that you are very proud of yourself, because it's been really, really
You're gonna
inspirational
make me
listening.
cry.
Yeah, you can cry. We can cry
Yeah.
together. But I say this with my heart. Honestly, it's been So
That'll be a five
beautiful.
hour podcast. Just cry.
Yeah, yeah, let's cry. Let's cry. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. I just wanted to acknowledge that because I know sometimes how lonely and hard it can be the healing journey, and we have to let go a lot of friends that were in our past
Yeah.
journeys, and so I see you. I recognize all the work that you've done on yourself, and it's so beautiful. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing all that you shared. And so tell us your three key takeaways, like very short, for people to really take from this conversation, really rich
Mm.
conversation.
Just three. I think the one thing is realizing your body's reaction to a threat is not because you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, you have a default with your personality or your core essence. It's trying to keep you safe. There is when you feel that reaction to flee or to fight or to fawn, it's not an inherently malfunction of who you are. It's your body trying to keep you safe. So I think if anything, having a bit of compassion for yourself and realizing that you're not on any level actually really trying to hurt you, even if the methods that are being used to keep you safe are outdated and they're no longer useful and they're harmful.
Mhm.
Having that compassion on yourself and the many parts that step in and try to, like, steer the ship to make sure that you're okay, um, was huge for me,
Yeah.
because I think the self-criticism and the shame that come from trauma more than anything is the most, it's like the most painful part. So so realizing, yeah, one, you you're just trying to be kept safe by your body. It's not trying to kill you. It's not trying to ruin your life.
Yes.
Yeah, two, I mean, we're talking about attachment and authenticity. I think for people who struggled with what I struggled with keeping our attachments at all costs because we want to feel connected, and by disassociating to our feelings, we think that we have all these connections. We think we have all these people, but in reality, it's not actually a real relationship. A real relationship is when intimacy is shared, and intimacy takes risk. Intimacy is saying, this is
Um,
who I am, this is what I think, this is how I feel, this is what I need. Are we going to be able to continue this while this is being met, while this is being considered? And vice versa. It's a back and a forth. A relationship that's just constantly with someone who's disassociated from themselves and just giving, it's not really a relationship. It's sort of a contract. Like, I will do all this stuff for you in hopes that I can control and manage everything. And we can be completely subconscious of this. It's not like we're
mm,
consciously trying to control people, but
yeah.
like it's a contract of trying to get your needs met without stating
Mm,
what your needs are. And that's not a relationship either. So
yeah.
for people that struggle with people pleasing or fawning, for the needing to have relationship and connection, realizing the real connection comes from when you can actually connect to yourself,
Mm,
to therefore let people in. And that's intimacy, that's vulnerability, and that's what a real
yeah.
relationship is.
Love that.
To, like, really realizing the importance of authenticity in relationships, really understanding
Oh,
that.
that's such a good one. Yeah.
It's so important. And then, and three, like, realizing that if you have a reaction and you don't have a huge story to point to, or super abusive past or parents or whatever else, but you're still having this experience, instead of just invalidating it or turning the pointer finger on it yourself, there's something inherently wrong with you. Go get to a point where you can feel safe to explore this trigger. Like, I would highly recommend doing a sort of bottom up therapy, whether it's, gestalt therapy, or whether it's, hypnotherapy, or working with the subconscious mind, or whatever else, something that really goes to the body and the breath first. Yoga is even a really good way to come back into that sense of
Yeah.
interoceptive sensitivity, to
Very powerful.
understand the ways that we're feeling, and you have to understand that from a safe space. And so you can ask your body what's happening, and you don't even really need to know the narrative, you don't even really need to know the whole story. as long as you can find a way to meet that trigger within a space that is safe, which is within a space that you can then give yourself a completely different experience of coming out of that situation, not overwhelmed, but stable, and being able to do what you need to do to re-regulate from something that used to overwhelm you, is it's so powerful. And you
Wow.
don't even really need to know what the story is. The body speaks
Yes.
without words,
Yeah.
right? The trauma doesn't have the words or the emotional awareness that the prefrontal cortex
Mm,
does. It's here. So you can just speak to the body, and
love that.
find a
Love that.
way to come out of the situation and rewrite the ending to that story, so you don't have to keep living from that point in the past.
Yeah, really powerful. Three key takeaways. So I'm sure everyone who is listening to us will take so much value from the entire podcast and also the key takeaways. And yes, I agree with our body is so has so much wisdom. So when you
Mhm.
start connecting more to your intuition, to your body, to your emotions, is gonna get you where you need to be. So my three key takeaways, very, very quick. Your emotions are your compass. So tend to your emotions and then they will direct you towards where you need to be.
Mhm.
The second one is authenticity and bringing the power back to yourself. How can you start doing that on a daily basis? Just start with three things that you are going to commit to yourself every day. Little things. It could be I'm going to today go for a haircut. Today I'm going to go for a massage. Today I'm going to do meditation. It doesn't need to be something big, or even if you want to start with one, but start to commit to something for yourself, and doing it is going to start bringing that confidence, love back, and power back to who you are, and prioritizing yourself. And the third one is having discernment of the people, the environments, and the situations that take you out of balance. So thank you so much, Rachel. It's been such a
Thank
beautiful
you.
podcast. I love this episode. And how can people contact you if they want just to chat, ask you questions, or even are you taking yoga classes? Where can they see
Yeah.
you?
Well, at the moment, I'm teaching at a co-working space, which isn't an open to the public thing, but I'm also starting a new studio called Feel Good Hood. It's in Hawthorne.
Ah, yeah.
It's a really beautiful, like, state-of-the-art place. It's got everything you possibly could need. It's got a gym, it's got cold dips, it's got a sauna, it's got all the classes, yoga, Pilates, all these movement classes that we always go to. It's got everything that you need, and I'll be teaching there Tuesdays. I'm doing a dynamic shaking meditation, which is a movement meditation,
Wow, love
and
that.
then doing a yoga nidra on
I'll be
Tuesday
there.
evening.
I'm
Yeah,
sold.
I would love to have you. Would love to have you. So yeah, it's Feel Good Hood. That's where I'm going to be
Amazing.
teaching on Tuesdays. But yeah, if anyone wants to contact me or have a chat, like, I'm always up for a chat. I obviously love talking about this stuff. Definitely contact me on my Instagram, which is
Perfect.
just Rachael Hevrin.
And I
It's
will
very
put
simple.
your details as well on in the description of the podcast. So if
Yep.
people want to reach out, they can contact you. Thank you so much again.
Fantastic.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure,
you.
and maybe we will do another episode because it's
I
been
would
such
love
a,
to.
yeah. I know we can talk for hours, so
Yeah.
unfortunately we have a limited time because I know we will lose audience if we make
Yeah.
them too long.
Yeah. Won't
But
drag it
yeah,
out too long.
thank
All
you
right,
so
hen.
much.
See you later.
See you all. See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.